I am Hannah Coleman, 33 years old, and I am standing in my parents' hallway holding a bridal magazine. I no longer want listening to my mother and sister decide the shape of my wedding without me. The dining room door is cracked just enough for voices to slip through like steam, my name, my date, and a bill that somehow already belongs to me. Bree laughs in that bright, ringing tone that always gathers approval, and my father clears his throat like a judge delivering a ruling. My hand tightens until the glossy pages bend, and somewhere in the house a clock ticks, as if measuring out the last few seconds of an old life. I should step in. I do not. I step back instead into the quieter light of the foyer where my breath can find me. By the time I reach the porch, the magazine is under my arm, and a decision is forming that does not feel like anything I have ever chosen before. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, then tap like and subscribe if you've ever stood in a doorway and realized a moment was asking you to become someone braver. I grew up in a small Midwestern town where front yards were trimmed on Saturday mornings and pies cooled on kitchen counters because that is what you did for neighbors. My mother Elaine taught us to write thank you notes the day after receiving anything, and my father Martin believed a well-pressed shirt could carry you through nearly any room. I learned to be useful early, set the table, carry the load, smooth the edge of a conversation before it cut, and I wore that usefulness like a ribbon I did not take off. When Bree came along, the house softened toward her without quite saying so. I noticed it in the way silence rearranged itself after her sighs, and in how the adults smiled at her plans, as if the future were already signed. By the time I reached college, I knew how to make a budget stretch, and how to arrive at a meeting 10 minutes early with an extra pen in case someone forgot theirs. I took a marketing job 2 towns over, then a better one in the city, the kind where the lobby has stone floors and the elevators whisper. It should have felt like a new beginning, and in some ways it did. The paycheck steadier, the coffee stronger, the skyline outside my window, a different kind of clock. But every Friday night I drove back for family dinner carrying flowers or bread or whatever the group text assigned to me, stepping into a role that fit even if it pinched. Bree would tell stories that gathered everyone's attention, and my mother would refill glasses while my father checked the roast, and I would make sure the napkins matched. Lucas entered that rhythm like a steady hand placed on a shaken table. He is the kind of man who reads instructions all the way through and remembers the name of the server who refilled the water. When we got engaged, he asked what I wanted the day to feel like, not what it should look like, and I said quiet joy, the words surprising me with their simplicity. We pictured something small, 50 people at most, a ceremony that began on time food. We would actually eat music low enough to talk over, and I felt relief settle across my shoulders like a shawl. It was the kind of plan you make when you finally realize your life is not a stage. It is a room you get to furnish with care. The first tremor came as a suggestion, the kind you can mistake for a favor if you are not listening closely. My mother mentioned that Bree and Thomas would be celebrating 5 years in the same month as our ceremony, and wouldn't it be meaningful to honor 2 milestones at once? She said it with a smile that had already imagined the photographs, and my father nodded, weighing calendars against guest lists. I said we would think about it, which is the polite version of no, and the conversation moved on as if it had never asked anything of me. Later that night, Lucas and I sat at our small kitchen table and talked about numbers, not just dollars, but the amount of room a joint event would take from the day we had been building. In most families, money is a topic. In ours, it is a weather system that moves through plans. My parents have always valued appearances that look effortless, which is another way of saying someone is carrying the effort. I have carried it more times than I can count, not because anyone ordered me to, but because I learned that problems end sooner when I pick them up. It is a skill that reads as kindness and feels like safety until the moment you realize you have been offering shelter while standing in the rain. As the weeks moved toward spring, the talk of a combined celebration returned softer this time, threaded through recipe ideas and parking logistics, and I kept saying we wanted something simple. My answers were acknowledged with nods, then set aside like coasters nobody used. What I heard through that cracked dining room door made something very old in me step forward and stand still. The words were not about meaning anymore. They were about arrangements people make when they expect a certain person to smile and say yes. I could have pushed the door open and started listing reasons, walked into the room with a face I have perfected over years, the one that says we can figure this out if I just bend a little more. When Violet first announced her engagement years ago, my father called me into his study late one evening. I still remember the weight of his hand on my shoulder as he explained how Thomas had lost his job and how the family needed my help. "It's only temporary, Naomi," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Family comes first. Your sister needs this." My mother stood nearby with her arms folded, adding, "If you really love your sister, you'll step up." I handed over $15,000 that night, my entire education fund. It was supposed to be for one semester of college, something I could make up later, but that one semester turned into 3. Instead of classrooms, I spent my nights working double shifts at the diner while Violet twirled across the dance floor in a gown that cost more than the car I drove to work. As Rosemary Clooney's song "Sisters" played over the speakers, I made myself a quiet promise: never again. 2 weeks later, my mother invited us to what she called a casual dinner. The table was set with the fine china, which was always a sign that something larger was planned. Violet and Thomas walked in 15 minutes late, the way they always did, smiling, as though the evening revolved around them. Once we were all seated, my mother cleared her throat and delivered the news with a rehearsed brightness in her tone. "We've had the most brilliant idea," she began, looking at my father as if passing a baton. She explained that my wedding would be combined with Violet and Thomas's 5th anniversary celebration. "It's symbolic," she insisted. 2 beautiful milestones in one perfect evening. Violet opened a folder she had prepared, neatly tabbed and color-coded, filled with lists of cakes, music, and themes. She spoke of matching colors and continuity with her original wedding, as though my own day was an extension of hers. Under the table, Robert's hand found mine. His steady squeeze grounded me as I looked at the faces around me, all expectant, waiting for my usual quick agreement. It was the role I had played since childhood, the agreeable daughter, the accommodating sister. I took a breath and forced the words out even as my heart pounded. "Let me think about it." The silence that followed was sharper than any argument. My mother's smile faltered. My father blinked as though he hadn't heard correctly, and Violet's mouth opened before closing again. My father was the first to recover, patting my shoulder like he always did when smoothing over a disruption. "Always practical," he said. "That's why we know you'll handle the finances." Violet's eyes glistened with carefully placed tears. "I thought you'd be excited." "Naomi will come around," my mother added, passing the bowl of potatoes as though nothing unusual had happened. I smiled faintly and nodded, letting them believe what they wanted to believe. Outwardly, I was the perfect daughter once again. Inside, however, a fire had started to burn. That night, while Robert drove us home, I stared out the window in silence. Their words echoed in my ears. "Family comes first, your sister needs this, Naomi will come around." My hands clenched in my lap as another promise formed, sharper and stronger than before. They thought I would fold just like I always had, but this time I was already planning. I returned to my parents' house late one evening, claiming I had forgotten a few things. The truth was, I needed answers. Their study was dim, the glow of the family computer casting shadows across the desk. I sat in the chair, my hands trembling as I clicked through my mother's emails. Each subject line made my stomach knot tighter. One chain in particular froze me in place: vendor payments, Naomi. I opened it slowly, scanning words that confirmed what I feared. My mother assured Violet not to worry about deposits, writing that I would cover all expenses once contracts were finalized. Attached files showed catering menus, entertainment packages, and venue options, each with notes labeling me as the bride responsible for payment. My pulse hammered as I scrolled further. Then a notification appeared on the tablet beside me, an order confirmation for a second wedding dress. The card number listed was mine. I whispered into my phone, "I need your bathroom, the code Robert and I used for emergencies." Within seconds he answered. "What happened?" His voice was tight. "They've been using my credit card." I said, my own words sounding hollow. "They even bought Violet another dress." Robert's calm broke anger cutting through. "That's fraud, Naomi. They've crossed a line." Back at our apartment, I checked my banking app. Withdrawals I had believed were deposits appeared clearly labeled for wedding expenses. My chest tightened. Robert explained that my parents had received a call from someone pretending to be our coordinator saying I wanted a simple ceremony without their contribution. The pieces fit together too neatly, leaving no doubt who had orchestrated it. I needed proof. On the desktop, I opened a file labeled W plus budget final. Rows of numbers filled the screen. Venue $22,000, catering $15,000, flowers $7,000, photography $6,000, entertainment $8,000. At the bottom sat the final sum, $63,000. In Violet's favorite purple font was a note Naomi's responsibility. My hand gripped the desk to steady myself. The next day, Jessica called from work, her voice sharp with disbelief. Violet contacted my office pretending to handle your wedding. Naomi, this isn't normal. This is abuse. That evening, Emily came by with Robert, and Mrs. Sullivan soon joined us with coffee and cookies. We sat at the kitchen table while they listened. Emily leaned forward, her voice firm. This isn't just your sister. Your mother enables, your father enforces, and you've always carried it. Mrs. Sullivan nodded, her tone gentle but steady. I've watched this pattern for years. It won't stop until you break it. The pressure only grew. Violet called, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Remember, I helped you get that job. Family connections matter. About the venue, have you chosen yet? My father spoke of helping with a house down payment, but only if the wedding went smoothly. My mother mentioned heart issues that ran in the family, sighing heavily, as though my hesitation threatened her health. The message was clear: give in or risk everything. That evening I told them at dinner I would need to be the one to sign the venue contract. My voice didn't waver. Their glances told me they understood the meaning beneath my words. Back home, I canceled the fraudulent dress order and changed every password linked to my accounts. My phone rang within the hour. Violet's voice was sharp. You're being ridiculous. That dress would have looked better on me anyway. You've gained weight. I swallowed the insult, let the call end, and locked my phone. Later, I stood alone in our bathroom, gripping the sink as silent tears streamed down my face. My shoulders shook, my breath came shallow, and my reflection blurred in the mirror. Robert knocked softly, but didn't come in, giving me the space I needed. I splashed cold water on my face, straightened my back, and studied the woman staring back. For years, I had been molded into the one who paid, who gave, who surrendered. But in that moment, I saw a faint spark of someone different. This battle wasn't over. They would continue pressing, continue taking, and I would endure it for now. But deep inside, something had shifted. I whispered to my reflection the words steady, though my eyes were red. Not anymore. The morning after my breakdown, sunlight streamed through the blinds, but I felt heavier than ever. Robert set a cup of coffee in front of me, without a word, his eyes steady on mine. You don't have to face this the way you always have, he said softly. They've crossed a line. This isn't family conflict anymore. It's control. His words lingered, reshaping everything I had endured into something I could finally name. That afternoon, Jessica stopped by holding a folder of her own. She had gathered examples from other clients showing how families sometimes overstepped boundaries. What they're doing to you, Naomi, it's financial abuse, she said plainly. I had never heard it called that before, and the truth of it landed with force. For years I had excused it as duty as sacrifice, but seeing it through her eyes changed everything. Later that week, Emily came by after work. She spread papers across our kitchen table, sample contracts, legal notes, things she thought might help. If you ever sign anything, make sure both your names are on it, she explained. That way they can't twist it around. I traced my finger over the lines of text, realizing how small steps could keep me from being trapped again. Mrs. Sullivan joined us for coffee that evening, her warm voice steady. Every family has a pattern, she told me. Yours has leaned on you too long. The only way it changes is if you refuse to carry it. With their encouragement, I began to act. I called my bank and canceled the fraudulent dress order. I changed every password, added new security questions, and placed alerts on my accounts. Watching each confirmation email arrive felt like putting bricks back into the walls they had knocked down. It didn't erase the fear, but it gave me something solid to hold on to. That weekend, my parents invited Robert and me to dinner again. The table was dressed with candles and fine silverware, the same trappings as before. As the meal began, my father spoke of a venue they had already chosen, his voice confident, as though my opinion no longer mattered. "We'll handle the details," he said, waving his hand casually. "Naomi can take care of the payment as always." I set down my fork and looked at them steadily. "Any contract will need both Robert's and my signatures. That's not negotiable." The words were measured, but my pulse raced. My mother's smile faltered, and Violet's eyes narrowed. My father cleared his throat, clearly unsettled. "There's no need to trouble Robert with these details," he said. But I didn't break my gaze. "It's our wedding," I answered. "We decide together." Back home that night, Robert wrapped his arm around me as we sat in silence. "That was different," he said after a while. "You didn't back down." I nodded, still feeling the echo of my words in the air. It was only one boundary, but it felt like a crack in the armor they had built around me. The next few days were quieter, though the tension never left. My phone buzzed with Violet's sharp messages, complaints about my supposed selfishness, reminders that her anniversary was at stake, insults about my appearance. I let most of them go unanswered. When the pressure felt unbearable, I walked into the bathroom, stared at my reflection, and whispered the same phrase again and again. "Not anymore." One evening, I stood in front of the mirror, scissors in hand. For years, my mother had insisted I wear my hair long and straight, saying it was most flattering. I gathered a strand between my fingers and cut. The snip was louder than I expected, the dark pieces falling to the floor. I kept cutting until the weight was gone, until I felt lighter. Robert stepped into the doorway, his smile spreading as he took in the change. "Time for something new," he said, and I smiled back. When Jessica heard what I had done, she laughed gently. "Sometimes change starts small, but it's powerful," she told me. We began sketching plans together, talking quietly about options that didn't include my family's demands. The lake house her cousin had mentioned, the chapel by the water, possibilities that belonged to me, not to them. For the first time in years, I felt a different kind of strength rising, not born of obligation, but of choice. My family might still push, still scheme, but I no longer felt like the same daughter who always folded. Something inside had shifted, and though I wasn't ready to fight openly, I was no longer their silent participant. The next afternoon, Robert and I followed my parents into the grand ballroom of Rosewood Manor. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting light across polished floors and tall windows that framed carefully trimmed gardens. The venue was breathtaking, designed for spectacle rather than intimacy. My father clapped the manager on the shoulder with pride, his voice booming. "Perfect for the big celebration. 200 guests will fit easily." I stopped short at his words. 200. We agreed on 50. My mother waved her hand as if brushing away a detail too small to matter. "We couldn't cut the list now. Everyone has already been notified." The manager, a man named Mr. Phillips, stepped forward with a thick contract. "If you're ready, we'll just need signatures and the deposit today." My father uncapped his pen with a flourish. "I'll sign first, then Naomi." Actually, I said, my voice clear, though my hands were shaking. Robert and I agreed that both our signatures are required on any contract. That isn't negotiable. The air in the ballroom shifted. My mother's smile tightened. "Robert doesn't need to be bothered with details," she replied. Violet let out a short laugh. "Since when do you make decisions at all?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Since I discovered these, I spread out the printouts, unauthorized credit card charges, orders placed with my information expenses disguised as deposits. Mr. Phillips's eyes darted between the pages, uneasy. My father turned to Violet, his voice low. "You told me she agreed to these." Violet crossed her arms, defiant. "She always pays. That's what she does." My voice steadied, surprising even me. "You took my education fund once. You're not taking my wedding day." Mr. Phillips cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should give you a moment." I shook my head. "No need. I'll contribute $6,000 toward the deposit. The remaining $57,000 is your responsibility." My father stared at me, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought he might erupt, but then he signed the contract with less certainty than before. That evening, Jessica called with a different kind of news. "I found a chapel by the lake," she said. "It's small but available the weekend before, and Robert's parents offered their lake house for the reception." I glanced at Robert, his eyes already bright with relief. The idea of exchanging vows, surrounded by people we trusted not by spectacle, felt like fresh air. "How much is the deposit?" I asked. "6,000, Jessica answered. I smiled, worth every penny. Later, Robert and I sat cross-legged on our apartment floor, wedding plans scattered between us. He leaned over and kissed my forehead. "I'm proud of you," he said. I picked up the scissors I had left on the table and held them to a strand of my hair. "What do you think? Time for a change?" His grin was answer enough. Snip by snip, the long style my mother insisted on fell away. I studied my reflection in the window, lighter and freer with each cut. The next morning, I slipped into a simple white sundress we had ordered online. No train, no beading, no veil trailing behind me. Just clean fabric that felt like mine. Jessica arrived with a timeline tucked under her arm, mapping everything down to 15-minute increments: the decoy wedding at Rosewood, the real one by the lake. Emily brought a folder confirming that legally my parents were solely responsible for the large contract they had signed. We worked late into the night outlining every detail. Every guest accounted for every contingency planned. At one point, Mrs. Sullivan stopped by with cookies, her wise smile softening the tension in the room. She placed a hand on mine. "Sometimes the bravest act is walking away," she said. "I wish I had found that courage years ago." The night before the supposed big day, Violet showed up at my apartment unannounced. Her eyes narrowed as she took in my shorter hair. "The venue called," she said without preamble. "They need final payment confirmation." I smiled calmly. "Everything has been taken care of. Tomorrow will be unforgettable." My tone made her pause, her gaze searching for signs of the old Naomi. She didn't find them. With a frustrated huff, she left. When the door closed, I pulled a small overnight bag from under the bed and packed only what mattered: my dress-new flats and our license. Robert leaned in the doorway, his voice steady. "Ready." I zipped the bag with finality, more than ever. On the morning of this big day, I sat in a borrowed bridal robe, sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors of Robert's parents' lake house. Jessica fussed with my hair, then snapped a quick picture with her phone. "This one's for the decoy," she said, her smile sharp with mischief. I posed just enough, making sure the plain background revealed nothing of our location. A moment later, the photo with 3 bride emojis and a champagne glass went out in a group text. My mother replied almost instantly. "Everyone's arriving at Rosewood. Your father is greeting the Hendersons now." I set the phone on the table and exhaled the weight of years lifting off my shoulders. "They're all there," I whispered to Robert, who lounged on the sofa with a mug of coffee, his tie still draped loosely around his neck. He raised his cup toward me. "To freedom." By 10:30, the country club was filled with nearly 200 guests. Jessica's cousin, who had slipped in as our eyes and ears, kept us updated with short messages. My mother circulated through the ballroom announcing minor delays. My father paced near the stage, sweat showing at his collar. Violet, true to form, complained loudly that her anniversary celebration was being ruined. At our lake house, Robert's friends strung white lights along the birch trees, their laughter mixing with the sound of the water against the dock. I sent another staged text, "Hair done, makeup next," running 30 minutes behind. Within seconds, my father messaged back that the minister had another event scheduled at 3. Violet accused me of being inconsiderate, her words sharp, even through a phone screen. I silenced notifications and turned back to the mirror. Emily pinned the last curl in place, then rested her hands on my shoulders. "Ready?" she asked. I met her gaze in the reflection. "More than you know." At noon, Jessica returned from her reconnaissance trip, nearly doubled over with laughter. "You should see them," she gasped. "Your mom is trying to keep everyone calm. Your dad looks ready to faint, and Violet is blaming you for insisting on her hairstylist." The image of 200 overdressed guests shifting uncomfortably in their chairs made me smile for the first time that day. Minutes later, Robert appeared in his navy suit, carrying the small bouquet Emily had arranged from his mother's garden. His eyes softened when he saw me in the lace dress I had chosen myself. No sequins, no beading, no heavy train, just fabric that felt like mine. He took my hand. "This is the only wedding I've ever wanted," he said quietly. We walked together to the arbor set up by the lake. 20 friends and relatives stood waiting, their faces warm, unguarded, free from expectation. As Robert's father began the ceremony, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying away the last traces of the ballroom I had left behind. When we exchanged vows, no one checked their watch, no one whispered behind a program. There was only us, surrounded by people who wished us joy. Across town, the venue manager at Rosewood handed my parents a folder marked with the balance due. The contract bore their signatures, their responsibility clear. The $6,000 I had provided sat documented as my only contribution. While they scrambled to explain, the untouched champagne tower glittered in the background, the 5-tier cake stood waiting with its elaborate topper, and guests murmured, realizing the celebration was unraveling before their eyes. Back by the lake, Jessica slid my phone across the table as we shared a simple reception meal. On the screen was a voice message from my mother, her tone brittle. "Naomi, this isn't funny anymore. The venue needs payment tonight. Your father had to give them retirement account information. Please call us." In the background, Violet's voice rose shrill with blame. Robert tapped the screen to silence it, then lifted his glass. "To my wife," he said, his voice steady, "the bravest woman I know." As the sun dipped lower, we danced on the grass beneath strings of lights. Laughter echoed across the water, unforced and real. I caught sight of Robert's parents watching us with pride. Jessica scribbling notes for the scrapbook she was already planning, Emily swaying gently with her husband. For the first time, I understood what it meant to choose the people who deserved to be called family. That night, after the last guest departed, I sat on the porch with Robert, the cool air brushing against our faces. I thought of the ballroom filled with tension and judgment, then of the peace surrounding me now. "It's done," I said quietly. He wrapped his arm around me. "No, Naomi," he whispered. "It's only just beginning." The morning after our wedding, the doorbell rang at precisely 10 o'clock. Robert and I exchanged a glance, neither of us surprised. We had set the wedding photos on the coffee table the night before, framed proof of the day we had chosen for ourselves. When I opened the door, my mother stood in front, her eyes red-rimmed, her perfume sharp in the air. My father loomed behind her, jaw tight. Violet hovered near his shoulder, her expression a twisted mix of fury and triumph. "How could you do this to us?" my mother cried as soon as she stepped inside. "After everything we've done for you." My father's voice followed, clipped and harsh. "You're legally responsible for this bill, Naomi. Whatever game you think you're playing, it ends now." Violet jabbed her finger toward me, her words fast and bitter. "I've already told everyone. You abandoned your own wedding out of spite." I let them spill their anger before moving to the dining table, where a leather portfolio lay waiting. Robert stood beside me, silent and steady. "I expected this visit," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "I've been preparing for it." I opened the portfolio and began laying out the contents. First came the recording, my phone speaker filling the room with Violet's voice. "She'll pay for everything just like she did for my wedding. That's what little sisters are for." My parents' laughter followed, their faces blanched in unison. My father started to protest. "Recording conversations," Robert cut in smoothly. "Perfectly legal in this state with one-party consent." I slid bank statements across the table next. "Here is proof of the only payment I committed to $6,000 for the deposit." My mother reached for the pages with trembling hands, but the venue manager said I placed printed emails in front of her, each marked with dates and responses. Here is where I clarified my limited involvement, and here is his reply confirming the contract holders are you and Dad. Violet snatched one of the papers, her voice rising. "This doesn't prove anything." I met her eyes, then laid down screenshots of the unauthorized charges. "This was my credit card, Violet. The second dress you ordered after ruining mine. Every timestamp is here." For the first time, her voice wavered. "You always make money such a big deal." My father's face had gone ashen. "Naomi, be reasonable. We can't possibly cover $57,000. I lifted the final document, a letter from a law firm. "The contract is in your names. The venue has your signatures. The balance is your responsibility." My mother sank onto the couch, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Why would you do this to your own family?" I steadied my voice. Because 5 years ago, you took $15,000 I had saved for my education. Because I gave $6,000 more this time to end the cycle. This isn't revenge. This is consequence. Silence fell until Thomas, who had remained by the door, finally spoke. His voice cut through like a blade. So you did the same thing to her 5 years ago. The question landed hard. Violet stammered, looking to our parents for defense. That was different, but neither offered support. My mother stared blankly at the papers. My father glared at Violet. The cracks in their alliance widened before my eyes. Your retirement fund, my mother whispered almost to herself. My father's voice rose sharp. My retirement fund. This was your idea. I stood and walked to the door, opening it wide. You can leave now. My new family will be here soon to celebrate. They gathered their things, shuffling toward the exit. At the threshold, Violet turned back. Her expression caught between resentment and something softer, perhaps recognition, perhaps respect. None of them spoke as the door closed behind them. Robert wrapped his arms around me, his voice gentle against my hair. It's over. I leaned into him, suddenly exhausted, the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. On the table behind us, our wedding photos glowed in the morning light, quiet proof of the life we had chosen. A year later, the scent of roasted turkey drifted through our kitchen as I arranged a centerpiece of red and gold chrysanthemums on the dining table. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching on the hardwood floors Robert and I had installed ourselves just a month earlier. He appeared in the doorway with 2 glasses of wine, raising one in a quiet toast. 1 year exactly, he said, his smile reaching his eyes. I nodded my chest, warm, the weight of the past finally replaced with contentment. That anniversary wasn't only about our marriage, it marked a year since we walked away from a staged celebration and chose a life of our own making. The photograph on our mantel reminded me daily, Robert and I laughing under the autumn leaves at the lake, neither of us looking at the camera. Real joy doesn't need to pose. The doorbell chimed, and when I glanced through the peephole, I saw Violet standing on the porch alone. No dramatic entrance, no entourage, just my sister, shoulders drawn tight against the cold. I opened the door and waited. I came to apologize, she said, her voice low, stripped of its usual sharpness. For a moment, I studied her face, searching for signs of the old performance, but found something else instead, something closer to humility. She stepped inside slowly, her words halting. Dad and Mom had to use their retirement savings to pay the venue. It forced us all to see what we had been doing. She paused, then added, Thomas told me he couldn't stay married unless I started therapy. He said he wouldn't live with someone who treated family like stepping stones. Her admission softened something in me. For just an instant, I saw the little sister who once clung to my hand on the first day of kindergarten. By evening, the house filled with warmth as Jessica arrived with a pie, Emily with her husband, and Robert's parents carrying armfuls of garden flowers. We gathered around the table, the conversation flowing easily, unmarked by the tension that had defined so many family meals of my past. When Emily's cousin, visiting from college, confessed the pressure she felt from her parents to change majors, I told her what had taken me years to understand. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be someone's victim. Boundaries aren't walls. They're the foundation for healthy relationships. After dinner, when most guests had gone, Violet lingered, stacking dishes in the sink. I spoke quietly beside her. You're welcome here as my sister, not as the person who tried to ruin my wedding. She nodded, and for once there was no argument, only acceptance. She mentioned our mother had started to see her own part in everything and wanted to call me when I was ready. I didn't answer then, but the possibility no longer felt impossible. Later, Robert handed me a small package wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a shadow box. Behind the glass sat the receipt for the $6,000 deposit, mounted against deep burgundy velvet. A small inscription at the bottom read, "Best investment we ever made in our freedom and future." I traced the frame with my fingertips, smiling at the truth of it. Some lessons are expensive, but they are worth every penny when they give you back your life. As I looked around our home, surrounded by people who chose to be there, I realized freedom hadn't come from revenge. It had come from reclaiming my dignity. I had stopped being the daughter who always folded and became the woman who chose herself. And in that choice, I finally found peace. Before I finish, let me ask you, have you ever had to draw a line with someone you loved? Did it bring you closer, or did it finally set you free? Share your story in the comments, and if you'd like to hear more, don't forget to subscribe.